Ever had one of those dreams? You know, one so big everyone laughs and tells you that it'll never happen.
Right.
But then somehow, against all odds, it actually comes true.
Like winning the lottery.
Uh-huh. Well, I was thinking more along the lines of the story of Israel.
Ah, okay, got it. Yeah, and that story is tied to this idea of Zionism.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, the origin story, how this movement went from, like you said, a dream to a global force.
Buckle up, folks. It's a wild ride full of, well, it's got everything. Highs, lows, and some real head-scratchers.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's rewind back to Europe in the 1800s.
Okay.
Think progress, but also a really weird paradox, especially for the Jewish communities.
Right, because on one hand, you've got Jews kind of integrating more, finding success, doctors, lawyers, the whole deal.
Yeah, but on the other hand,
Well, there's this new wave of hate, this, I guess you could call it a racial anti-Semitism.
it didn't matter if you changed your name, your clothes, even your language.
You couldn't change your blood, and they wouldn't let you forget it.
Chilling, right? And this is where Theodor Herzl enters the scene. He's pretty much the father of modern Zionism. Hey.
You got it. And his story, oh man, what a story. Journalist, playwright, a real cosmopolitan guy.
And at first, he just wanted to be, what was it, a Prussian aristocrat.
Straight from his diaries. Never would have guessed that this was the guy who would kickstart Zionism.
Ironic, right?
Mm.
But then comes the Dreyfus affair. This really throws a wrench in things for him.
Big time. Remember, he's covering this trial, this Jewish army captain falsely accused of treason, and...
It was all just blatant anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. And Herzl's watching this, seeing the pure hatred aimed at Dreyfus.
Must have been a huge wake-up call. Like, wait, assimilation isn't the answer.
Pretty much. It was a realization for a lot of European Jews at the time, no matter what they did, how they fit in.
They would always be the outsider. The other.
And that is what leads him to write The Jewish State in 1896.
This is his big idea, right?
Yeah.
Laying out the blueprint for a Jewish homeland, a safe space from all this persecution.
He basically says, look, the only way to solve this Jewish question is with a Jewish state.
Bold move. So how'd that go over? Did everyone just jump on board?
Well, not really. It was a mixed bag. Some, especially those facing the worst of it in Eastern Europe, they were all for it.
Yeah, makes sense.
But a lot of Western European Jews, not so much. They thought it was too radical, even dangerous.
Interesting how geography and your personal experience really shaped how you saw Zionism.
Yeah.
If you were living comfortably, why rock the boat, right?
Right. But for those living in poverty, fear, and violence, well, a safe haven sounds pretty good.
It's like night and day. Take the Jews in the Russian Empire stuck in that palest settlement.
Yeah, they were trapped, couldn't move freely, jobs were limited, religious practices restricted, and on top of all that...
Pogroms. Brutal, organized attacks. Just horrific. It's important for our listeners to understand that this was more than just everyday discrimination.
Absolutely. We're talking about state-sanctioned violence wiping out entire communities.
It's no wonder so many of them saw Zionism as a lifeline.
For them, Herzl was a beacon of hope, a leader who could get them to safety.
But here's where things get, well, a little complicated. Because even though his biggest supporters were from Eastern Europe...
His diaries show some pretty, how do I put this?
Snobby. Elitist.
Yeah, something like that. He calls them beggars. Not exactly a glowing endorsement.
It's a good reminder that even movements with good intentions can have their internal biases.
For sure. So, okay, we've got the vision, we've got the supporters, but how does Herzl actually make this happen? Does he just pack his bags and head for Palestine?
Not quite. He was a man of action, though.
Yeah.
A real hustler for the cause.
He was constantly on the move, traveling all over, meeting world leaders, anyone who'd listen, trying to get support for a Jewish homeland.
He even went straight to the top, the Ottoman Sultan himself, Abdul Hamid II, the guy who ruled Palestine at the time.
Talk about a power move. And Herzl basically says, hey, let me help you pay off your empire's debts, and in exchange, give Jews some autonomy in Palestine.
Wow. Talk about bold. So how'd that go?
Not great. The Sultan was like, nope, can't sell you even an inch of land. Doesn't belong to me, it belongs to my people.
Plan A, busted. So what's next?
Herzl didn't give up easily. He even considered a temporary spot in East Africa offered by the British.
East Africa. That's a long way from Zion. How does followers feel about that?
Let's just say it was controversial. Herzl presented it as a stopgap until they could get Palestine.
Makes sense.
But the Zionist Congress, they were totally against it. Their hearts were set on the biblical land of Israel.
Can't really blame him for that.
And it's during this whole debate that Herzl makes this super dramatic oath. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right arm dry out. Heavy stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that really captures how deeply they felt connected to that land. Despite all the setbacks and disagreements, Herzl just wouldn't quit. He wasn't just a dreamer, he was a doer, a networker, constantly pushing things forward.
You said it. And somehow, amidst all that, he finds time to write a novel, Alt New Land, which means Old New Land.
Sounds fascinating. What's it about? What kind of future did he imagine?
It's set 20 years in the future. Jews have settled in Palestine, but here's the kicker. It's peaceful.
Really?
Yeah, no constant warfare, no tension. It's Jews and Arabs living together, sharing a language even. It's like this ideal utopia.
That is so different from what actually happened.
Isn't it? And get this, Tel Aviv, one of the most iconic cities in Israel, is actually named after the Hebrew title of Herzl's book.
Wow, the irony.
History is full of it. And sadly, Herzl doesn't get to see any of this play out.
Yeah, he dies young, right?
1904, heart failure, just 44 years old. Burned out, I guess, from all the fighting for his dream.
What a loss. But the movement he started, well, it lived on. And as we enter the 20th century, things are about to get a lot more complicated.
Oh, yeah. Things are about to take a dark turn. The Holocaust, the rise of militancy in the Zionist movement, all that's coming up next.
So as we enter the 1900s, things really start to change. Zionism goes from this idealistic dream to like a desperate fight to just survive.
You're talking about Hitler, the Holocaust. I mean, that period just changed everything, not just for Jewish people, but for the entire world. 6 million Jews killed. Entire communities just gone. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And the world kind of just stood there, did nothing. It's hard to imagine.
It really is. And for Zionism,
The Holocaust made it clear.
yeah,
A Jewish state wasn't just some nice idea anymore. It was a necessity, a safe haven, somewhere Jews could control their own future, make sure nothing like this could ever happen again.
so it's in this context of fear, desperation, that we see Zionism change.
Yeah.
It becomes more pragmatic.
More than pragmatic, it becomes militant.
Right. Because now, with Europe basically closed off, Palestine becomes the only option. It was under British control at the time, right? It was. And you can't talk about this period without mentioning the Balfour Declaration, 1917.
The one where Britain basically said, yeah, sure, a national home for the Jewish people sounds good.
Exactly. But it's a complicated document. It kind of hints at a Jewish homeland, but it doesn't really address the other people already living there.
The Arabs?
The Arabs. So you've got two groups with legitimate claims to the same land, both with this, like, historical connection.
It's almost like the Balfour Declaration, trying to fix one problem, just created a whole new one.
Exactly. And as more Jews start moving to Palestine, things get tense.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
What does that do to the Zionist movement? How do they react?
Well, facing conflict in Palestine and the horrors unfolding in Europe, Zionism has to change. Groups like the Haganah, they become really important.
The Haggah.
Yeah, a paramilitary organization. It's not about peaceful settlements or farming anymore. It's about self-defense.
About fighting back.
Yeah, against the British, against Arab militias, whoever.
It's the birth of what some people call the new Jew, this pioneer, but also this hardened survivor. I remember seeing a picture once, a Zionist pioneer, holding a hoe in one hand and a rifle in the other. It's powerful.
It is, and it shows how things were changing. After the Holocaust, no one believed the world would protect them. They had to protect themselves.
It makes sense. The world stayed silent while millions were killed. Having a Jewish state, a place where they could be safe, that becomes the top priority.
And that leads us to 1948.
The year Israel was born.
Right.
A huge year, but also a year filled with a lot of pain. It changed the Middle East forever.
The UN had voted to partition Palestine. One Jewish state, one Arab state. Zionist leaders, they accepted the plan, even though they weren't totally happy with the borders.
But
the Arab leadership, they said no.
And
War. The next day, war breaks out, May 15th, 1948. The same day, Israel declares independence.
5 Arab nations invade: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. It's known as the War of Independence in Israel, but in Palestine they call it the Nakba.
The catastrophe. Yeah.
A moment that still shapes everything today. The stories each side tells are so different.
And Israel. They win against all odds. They secure their existence, even expand their territory beyond what the UN had outlined.
But for the Palestinians, it was a disaster. Hundreds of thousands displaced from their homes. And that displacement, It hasn't stopped.
It's a reminder of what this conflict has cost, the pain and loss on both sides. It's definitely not the peaceful utopia Herzl wrote about.
No, it's much more complicated than that. A Jewish homeland, but with a heavy price tag.
Right. And after 1948, Zionism takes on new meanings. It becomes part of this whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a term that brings up so many emotions, so many different interpretations.
So where do we go from here? How do we even understand Zionism today, after everything that's happened?
That's the question, isn't it? So we've gone from those early idealistic days of Zionism in Europe to, well, the birth of Israel, the 1948 war, and all the aftermath. But that's not where the story ends. Zionism keeps evolving. And today, well, in light of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's complicated. So how do we understand it today? What does it even mean in the 21st century?
Right. It's the question. Zionism, it means different things to different people. For some, it's still just about the Jewish people having their own homeland, that self-determination thing we talked about, Herzl's dream.
That safe haven, free from persecution.
Yeah.
But, like we've seen, getting there. It wasn't exactly a walk in the park.
Yeah, no kidding. And then for others, especially when you think about what Palestinians have gone through, Zionism means something else. Displacement, loss, their own struggle for self-determination, the Nakba. It's a huge part of that story.
It's hard to ignore. Creating Israel had consequences. Palestinians lost their homes, and they're still dealing with that today.
Absolutely. And then you've got the settlements in the West Bank, the expansion. International law says it's illegal, but it keeps happening. And for a lot of Palestinians, it feels like Zionism is all about expansion, taking more land, just like what happened in 48.
So how do you even begin to reconcile those two views? Can you acknowledge both? The Jewish need for a homeland, AD, what Palestinians experience.
That's the hard part. It takes nuance. You have to recognize the history, the fact that people on both sides have suffered. We got to move past the simple stories, the easy answers, and really look at how messy things are.
And admit that there's no single Zionist view, just like there's no single Palestinian view. Everyone has their own experiences, their own stories.
Exactly. You have to acknowledge that both sides have valid narratives, even when they seem totally opposite. It's not about picking a side. It's about understanding. How did we get here? What choices were made?
There's this historian, Derek Penslar. He says that Zionism today is in a state of anguish. What do you think he means by that?
Anguish. It's a strong word. I think it means there's this feeling of unease, that maybe achieving the dream of a Jewish homeland, it came at too high a price.
Like there's some regret.
Maybe. Or just a realization that things aren't finished. That Zionism, or wherever it goes from here, it's tied to what happens with the Palestinians.
It sounds like a moment of reflection. Looking back at the choices that were made and facing the hard questions about what's right and wrong. It's not the celebration you might have seen in the early days of Israel.
It's definitely not. And if we want a future that's more just, more peaceful, we have to face that anguish. We have to be honest, empathetic, and ready to have some tough conversations.
It all goes back to understanding Zionism, all its complexities, the good, the bad, the in-between. If you want to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you have to start there. And it's still unfolding. There's no easy ending to this story. But we have to keep talking about it, keep trying to understand if we want any hope of finding a solution.
And remember, history isn't just something in the past. It shapes who we are, what we do, even how we see the world. Zionism shows how powerful ideas can be, how they can inspire, motivate, change things completely. But it also shows that good intentions can have consequences you don't expect.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, think about this. How is Zionism still shaping things in the Middle East? How does that history affect what's happening today? Keep exploring these ideas, keep asking those hard questions, and keep searching for understanding. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the topics that matter.